The film begins with two cops named Roland and Johnny. At that time, they're keeping an eye on a gang that's doing bad stuff. The gang was dealing with illegal things. When Roland and Johnny tried to catch the bad guys, they didn't want to get caught. They even fought back, and it turned into a big fight with guns. After they managed to stop the bad guys, Johnny noticed a lot of money that belonged to the gang. He got a strange feeling, like goosebumps. He told Roland they should take the money and share it. Nobody else would know, just them. But Roland is a good cop, and he didn't want to do something wrong. He wanted to stay loyal to his duty of serving the country. Johnny then said he was just joking and testing Roland's honesty. Later, when Roland was going to call their boss, Johnny surprised everyone and shot him. Johnny took the money and made it look like the gang killed Roland. He made everything look like a plan. Afterward, Johnny called for backup from the police and said that the gang had killed Roland. Half an hour later, more police officers who were there to help finally arrived. At this point, Johnny starts making up a story in front of the boss cop. He acts really sorry that he couldn't protect Roland. At that time, Johnny thinks Roland is the best partner he's ever had. But the boss cop tells Johnny not to be too sad because the doctors just said that Roland is still alive because they rushed him to the hospital. When Johnny hears this, he's shocked and worried because Roland is the only one who knows about the bad things he did. Now, the scene changes to Roland at the hospital. The doctors are taking care of him. He was in really bad shape and almost died, but he's tough, so he survived through the worst part. The next day, Johnny goes to the hospital to try to kill Roland before he tells the police about what Johnny did. But when Johnny gets to Roland's room, a nurse is in there giving him medicine. So Johnny has to hide until the nurse leaves. While waiting, Roland sees Johnny and figures out that Johnny wants to hurt him. Earlier, Roland's boss, Regina, came to visit. While Regina was talking to a nurse, Roland sneakily put her gun in his bag. At that moment, Regina had to leave when the nurse said Roland needed to rest for a full 2 days. Once Regina left the hospital, she realized her gun was gone. She thought it might have fallen into Roland's room. Meanwhile, Johnny had entered Roland's room and was about to harm him. At that time, Roland was pretending to be asleep, but when Johnny tried to hurt him, he suddenly shot Johnny. Just then, Regina walked in and saw Roland shooting Johnny. Then Roland said he'd explain later. A few weeks went by, and Regina visited Roland's house. She found out he still couldn't work like he used to because he wasn't fully recovered. The case involving Johnny was all sorted out, cause the police knew Johnny stole money from the gang and wanted to kill Roland. Soon after, Regina explained that headquarters wanted to retire Roland because he might not be as good as before, and he's not young anymore. Hearing that, he had no choice but to accept the decision. A few months later, Roland's health had improved, but he found himself feeling really bored since he wasn't working anymore. Day in and day out, he occupied himself by messing around with his assortment of weapons. It was sad to know that his wife and kids had passed away in a car accident. Then, something changed. Suddenly, a new person came into Roland's life, a guy named Connor, along with his daughter Nikita. They were getting ready to watch a boxing match, and it turns out that Nikita's boyfriend Mason was one of the boxers. During a match, he came out as the winner. Later in the evening, Mason threw a party to celebrate his victory, and Nikita was right there with him, having a good time. Once the party wrapped up, they left, surrounded by a bunch of bodyguards who kept a close watch on Nikita. But things took a scary turn when they reached the parking lot. Out of nowhere, a group of kidnappers attacked the bodyguards with the aim of snatching Nikita. In the midst of the chaos, Mason did something surprising. He just left Nikita alone and took off. While the fight raged on, the kidnappers tried to grab her, but luckily, she fought back. In the end, she managed to break free from their clutches and escape. The next day, Nikita's dad, Connor, gave his best friend a call, and turns out that friend was Roland. At that time, Connor wanted to know if Roland was busy. Roland said he wasn't really up to much since he hadn't had a job for a while. Then, Connor got right to the point and asked Roland to come over to his place in a far-off town. Hearing that, Roland agreed, especially since they hadn't seen each other in ages. When Roland got there, a private driver that Connor had sent was ready to pick him up and take him straight to Connor's house. On the way, the driver noticed some bullies bothering his little sibling. The driver couldn't stand for it, so he got out of the car and confronted them. Those bullies didn't waste any time and started attacking the driver. Roland wasn't about to just watch, so he jumped in to help. Not long after, Roland arrived at Connor's place. Connor was super happy to see his friend and gave him a warm welcome. After they caught up on what's been going on, Roland asked the big question that why Connor had brought him all the way out here. There, Connor explained that not too long ago, his daughter Nikita had almost been kidnapped. He had a hunch that the people behind it were hired by his business rival. You see, he was a really wealthy oil guy, and he thought this rival of his was trying some shady stuff. Because all of that, Connor needed some seriously skilled bodyguards, like the cream of the crop kind. Knowing how awesome Roland was, he decided to offer him the gig. At that moment, Roland didn't have a job, so he jumped at the chance. Once they were on the same page, Connor wasted no time and introduced Roland to Nikita. And guess what? Nikita still remembered Roland from back in the day. He used to come around with his daughter. Mason was there too since he was at Connor's place. Turns out, Nikita had actually forgiven Mason for running off when those kidnappers showed up. The next day, Roland was on the job as Nikita's bodyguard. To play it safe, he had Nikita put on a necklace that had a tracker on it. And he didn't stop there cause he made sure he had all the gear he might need, weapons and all. Plus, he had the brilliant idea of getting security cameras installed all over Connor's house. One night, Roland was hanging out at a nightclub where Nikita, Mason, and their buddies were chilling. And guess who was there? Cross, the big boss of a mafia crew. At that time, Roland noticed Mason getting a message from Cross and going into another room. Turns out Mason works for Cross cause he's like his right-hand guy. But get this, Mason wasn't cozying up to Nikita because he liked her. Nope, he was just using her for his own gain. Soon after, Nikita's friend got caught up with some guy and they started going at it. Roland rushed in and told the guy to back off, but this dude wasn't having it and started throwing nasty words around. Well, Roland wasn't about to let that slide. Things got heated and Roland ended up having to give him and his buddies a lesson. After that, Roland scooped up Nikita and got her out of there. But Mason showed up and he was pretty ticked off. You see, the guys who got smacked around were actually Mason's pals, but fortunately, Nikita had Roland's back and defended him. The very next day, Roland caught up with Simon, a detective he used to be buddies with back in the day. Turns out, Roland was curious about the background of Cross, the big shot boss who's got Mason under his wing. Soon after, Simon spilled the beans that Cross was a big deal in the mafia world. He was suspected of all sorts of shady stuff, such as smuggling, illegal fights, and kidnappings. The FBI had their eye on him for a while, but they hadn't found any real proof yet. Simon also mentioned that the Cross family had a beef with Connor. It all started with a land dispute. At that time, Simon had a hunch that Cross might be scheming something against Nikita, so he asked Roland to team up and help out. Speaking of Nikita, she's hanging out with Connor. Turns out she's a fan of Roland's style, and she finds him impressive and totally reliable. She even mentioned feeling safer with him than Mason. Yep, Mason might be a boxer, but she's got more trust in Roland's protection. In the afternoon, Nikita dropped by Roland's place. She wanted to talk about how she missed Roland's kid, who used to be her childhood buddy. She was sad that Roland's child had passed away unexpectedly. At the same time, Roland shared that he missed his child and wife every moment, but he believed in moving forward without regrets. There, they chatted, and Nikita expressed how safe she felt when she was around him. Later in the evening, Nikita went back to the nightclub, but this time without Mason or his pals. Roland was there, just observing. When Nikita was done, she seemed pretty tipsy from all the drinks. That's when she opened up about feeling liberated when Mason wasn't around. In her not-so-sober state, Nikita blurted out that she felt like her heart was leaning toward Roland. He just smiled back, secretly feeling the same way. Little did they know, Mason was watching them from his car, looking pretty annoyed. Seems like Nikita getting closer to Roland, her own bodyguard, wasn't sitting well with him. The next day, Roland was on the sly, tailing Mason's car. At that time, Mason met up with Cross and his main sidekick. Turns out, Cross had given Mason a task that he wanted Nikita taken to someplace because he was plotting to kidnap her. He made it clear that Nikita had to go alone and Roland shouldn't catch wind of it. From a distance, Roland was watching their meetup. Sadly, he couldn't hear their conversation. After that, Mason headed straight to Nikita's house. Once there, Mason hurried Nikita to come along, saying Roland wasn't around. On the way, Nikita asked what made Mason suddenly ask her out, considering she was supposed to be with Roland. There, he explained he just wanted some alone time with her, no interruptions. What they didn't know was that Roland was still trailing them, keeping an eye on Mason's car from behind. Roland was curious about what exactly Cross was scheming with Mason. Now, back to Mason. His car got stopped by a bunch of Cross's men. There, Cross was up to no good cause he wanted to kidnap Nikita. Roland got wind of the plan and jumped into action, having a shootout with Cross's men. Sadly, two of them managed to grab Nikita and hightailed it out of there. In the chaos, they accidentally ripped off Nikita's necklace, the one with the GPS, and tossed it aside. As if that wasn't enough, the police showed up and caught Roland in the mix. He was in a real pickle, about to be taken to the police station. At the station, Simon, Roland's good buddy and a detective, was the one doing the questioning. Then Roland spilled the beans that he had to get out ASAP, because Nikita got snatched by Cross's goons. After some back and forth, Simon cut Roland some slack and let him go. Meanwhile, Connor got a call from Cross. There, Cross spilled the beans that he had Nikita, and if Connor wanted his daughter back safe and sound, he needed to cough up $5 million in cash. But that's not all cause he also wanted Connor's land certificate, the one with oil and uranium on it. At that time, Cross claimed the land that Connor's dad used to own actually should have been his, but Connor grabbed it, and that's how he turned into a big shot with money that'll last generations. Then, Cross threw out a threat, saying Connor better hand over what he wants by tomorrow night, and he better not snitch to the cops. Soon after, Simon popped by to see Connor. He wanted to help find Nikita, but Connor was spooked by Cross's threats. He clammed up and didn't spill a thing. Simon also wondered about Roland's whereabouts. However, Connor didn't have a clue cause Roland hadn't shown up yet. Meanwhile, Roland paid a visit to the driver, who was with his sister back then. There, he asked if the driver ever took Nikita to Mason's place. The driver said yes and offered to take him there. Soon after, Roland and the driver rolled up to Mason's place. There, he took care of Mason's buddies, who were actually Cross's crew. After that, Roland got Mason talking, pushing him to reveal where Nikita was. Mason said he'd spill if Roland promised not to off him. Hearing that, Roland agreed, and finally got the scoop on Nikita's location. Back home, Roland met up with Connor. There he spilled that he knew where Nikita was, but Connor asked him to play it cool and not rush in. At that time, Connor was super worried about Nikita's safety. He planned to give Cross what he wanted, as long as Nikita came out okay. He didn't want to drag anyone else in, fearing it might put Nikita's life on the line. Time was ticking, and the next night, Connor was dead set on giving Cross everything he demanded, no strings attached. Behind the scenes, Nikita was still being held captive by Cross. It hit her like a ton of bricks that Mason was involved in all this. At that time, Cross and the gang were in a hurry, racing Nikita to the meeting spot. After all, Connor was probably waiting by now. Long story short, Connor meets Cross and his crew. There, he hands over the suitcase with what Cross asked for. Then, Cross tells Mason to give it a once-over. But guess what? Roland is also on the scene. He doesn't waste time and takes out the snipers that Cross had brought along for protection. After the money, diamonds, and land certificates get the green light, Cross orders his crew, including the snipers, to take out Connor. At this point, he corners Cross. Then, just as it looks like Connor's about to finish Cross off, Simon and the cops show up to put the brakes on the whole situation. Meanwhile, Roland is on a mission to save Nikita, who's being taken to Cross's main place by his top guy. It's a one-on-one showdown between Roland and Cross's right-hand man, and it's pretty clear Roland's got this in the bag. Long story short, Roland rescues Nikita from the situation. At the same time, Simon, who's been keeping an eye on Cross for a while, nabs him. Soon after, Roland had tipped Simon off, which led to Simon showing up on the scene. The film ends. The moral lesson from this film is always make sure to keep track of your GPS necklace, or you might end up in a shootout with the mafia.